very warm welcome to everyone once again on the day 4 of the Media Research Workshop, where we hear from very experienced teachers of Christ Deemed to be University and Navrachna University. Myself, Misbah Mansoori, and I am the MC for today's session. Today, our first speaker is Mr. Dinesh Panchal, who is pursuing his PhD in Business Management, Business Models from SVKM's NMIMS School of Business Management. His research topic is named as Analysis of Business Model Typology, Study of Indian Firms. He has done his Masters of Management from IIT Bombay, Shailesh J. Mehta School of Management in 2005. He is an engineering graduate from Mumbai University. Mr. Panchal has over 21 years of experience in engineering, project management, heavy engineering fabrication, data analytics, and teaching. He has worked with Larsen & Toubro Limited, Heavy Engineering Division as Assistant Manager, Project Management Group, with Abinsa Engineering Private Limited as Engineering Director, and with SVKM's NMIMS as Assistant Professor in Business Analytics, Technology Management, and Operations Management. He is currently working as an Assistant Professor and Head of Center for Continuing Education at Navrachna University, Vadodara. So hereby I invite you, sir, for sharing your thoughts on sampling and sampling design. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ba. So friends, as you know, my background is more on work ex and less on academics. So I'm quite new to the academics for almost 5 to 6 years only. And before that, for 16 to 17 years, I was in industry. And one thing I learned was that, if you can convince, you can get through. So the convincing is the key. And that's a message I would like to give with a couple of examples, some from my own life, some from some others' life. And that's how I plan to address this particular topic. Because whenever you do research in your life, anytime, this one question will always come. What was your sample? And what was your sample size? And trust me, I sat for almost 8 to 10 research defenses, PhD defenses as audience. And almost in all the cases, this question was asked, and the researcher struggled to answer that question. So that's what the background I want to give. And let me share my screen. And what I'll do, I'll just start with the very, very basic things about sampling and sampling design. And then we'll go to the concepts which are actually implemented into the research. Okay, so just bear with me for initial 5 to 10 minutes. If you find it's too trivial, just relax yourself. Take a deep breath 4 or 5 times. It will relax you from the whole days of stress what you might have had. So let me share my screen. I hope my screen is visible to all of you. So let me start my topic about sampling. Most of us know about sampling. Okay, what do you mean by sample? But there was one person who was not knowing anything about sampling or sample. So let me introduce that person. You might have seen this movie called Dhamal. And there are these characters. This is Inspector Kabir. Let me say pen here, red color. Yeah, this is Inspector Kabir. Then this is Baban. Then Detective Roy, Adi, and Manav. These 4 characters, they believe in not working, no hard working. They want easy money, so they try to fool somebody. Here they were trying to fool their landlady, and they stole the pizza of the landlady, and then trying to fool the landlady that we didn't do it. So this way their life was going on. Sometimes selling a painting to a person who doesn't need a painting for 10,000 rupees or 20,000 rupees. So in this thing, what happened? One day they happened to meet Mr. Bose here, and he give them a tip. Okay, I have of my whole life I earned around 10 crores rupees, which I kept somewhere in Goa, San Sebastian Garden, Bade W ke niche. You go and take those money. And this person dies. So these 4 people decided, easy money, no? They got it. So they decided to go on to that journey. So they took a car of Baman's father. That's called contractor Nari. And they were driving in the night. It happened that the car got stuck with the tree. Now it's a jungle, forest. They are in the dark. But in this one character, Mr. Adi, he was a well-planned person, somewhat like me, planned for everything. So he told Mano that since it's a night journey and we might need a light, so better you take a matchbox with you and ensure that everything is okay. That was the instruction given to the Mano. So here is Mr. Adi and here is Mano. So Adi told Mano that initially, before starting the journey, that this is a night journey. There may be darkness, the forest, everything. So to be on a safer side, take something, matchbox or something, because of which, from which we can, get a light in case if we need it, and ensure that everything goes right. So this incident happened. Now everything is dark. They need a light. So Adi says, "Don't worry, friends. I'm prepared. Here I take out the match and light the fire." He tries the first matchstick. It didn't work. Tries the second one. It didn't work. Third one, it didn't work. He asked Mano, "Hey Mano, what happened?" Mano, those who have seen the movie, do you know what Mano replied? He said, "When I tried, all were burning." Because he was told to ensure that everything is right. Everything should be right. So he checked. I'm ticking this matchbox. So let me check all the matches are proper or not. Right? And we laugh at this point, right? In the movie. But you see the concern of Mr. Mano. He wanted to be doubly sure that nothing should go wrong. So whatever matchstick I pick up, it should work. So he checked all of them. Right? You might say, "Aisa karne ka kya, why to do this kind of thing? Just put 2-3, just check 2-3 matchsticks and then finish." So if I ask you a question, let's say if you were in place of Mano, who knows something about sampling, what you would have done? Let's take a hypothetical case. We have 30 matchstick. So out of 30 matchstick, would you prefer to burn 5 and take rest of the 25? Or would you prefer to burn 25 and take rest of the 5? Okay. So two options: burn, check small and take a risk for the bigger chunk, or test the bigger chunk and take a small chunk with you. What you would do, right? And there may be many more combinations between these two. And this is a typical question what we are trying to address here. How much should I check so that I can take a risk for the rest of the things? So I'm using this two word here. How much should I check? That's a sample size. And the risk I want to take. If I want to take a bigger risk, I should check bigger, right? I should check for a bigger size. If I want to take a smaller risk, what should I do? So here the problem is that there may be some cases where, like matchbox, where you check the things and you are actually destroying the product itself. For example, a chef, preparing a soup. Let's say he's preparing a soup for one person like me, a common man like me. What he's going to do? Maybe he will just prepare the soup. He's doing this activity day in, day out. So he may not test it also, right? He'll just prepare. He knows the procedure very well. He is doing this day in, day out. So he'll prepare a soup, tomato soup, bring it to me and say, "Dinesh, it's ready. Go and consume, and I will eat." Imagine a case where instead of me, our Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, would have come to consume this soup. Then now what he will do? He will make the soup, check himself, ask 2-3 more people to come and check, and if everything is right, then only they will go ahead. Are you getting this? Risk and sampling. Now in my case, when I was to consume a soup, he might have just checked physically, okay, color, smell, everything is okay. Just go and give it to the Dinesh. If it's the Prime Minister Modi, check once, maybe twice, maybe thrice. If all the 3 people says okay, then only go ahead. Otherwise not. For example, when I was in L&T, we were making one component for a submarine. And we have been asked to prepare 3 components. Same, exactly. Only one part, the submarine head, where the front portion of the submarine, and the tail portion, where the propeller mounts. So in my department, this particular components were being made, but we have been told by the Navy to prepare three of identical, and out of the three, two were tested for the extreme pressure, and in that the component got damaged. If the two things, and out of the three, which one two they will check, that depends on them. So I have to make all three identical. I gave them all three. Out of those three, they picked up the two, checked them extreme with extreme condition, and found out that everything is okay. And then only the third component was put onto the submarine, which was sailed in, I think, 2016 or 17. So you can see the critical the risk here. The risk in my case, if I'm consuming a soup, the risk in case of if the guest is Prime Minister Modi or the submarine. So this is the point which we have to keep in our mind when we decide about the sample size. What statement we want to make? If that statement is to be applied on a, let's say, larger population, so whatever decision you are going to make, if that decision is going to be applied on a larger population, for example, the COVID vaccine efficacy or effectiveness, whether it's a 70%, 75%, 80%, 90%, whether there are any side effects or not side effects. Now you think of a risk here. If the risk is bigger, you have to take a bigger sample size. I hope till this point you have at least grasped and digested that sample size decision is not in isolation. We have to consider for what application and for what risk we are deciding about this. For example, here the food items, the pizzas are being made continuously. Let's say these are the packed pizza where you pack them in a sealed packet, bring it home, put it inside the oven, heat it up and eat. Here, let's say thousands of pizzas are being produced day in, day out. What they will do? Are they going to check each and every pizza? No. They'll check some of them, and rest of the things they'll push it out. Because here, if the process through which the pizzas are being made, I repeat, if the process through which the pizzas are being made, if the process is stabilized, standardized, you may not have to check for a bigger sample. Remember that chef example? The chef has made that soup day in, day out. He may not want to check it. For example, I also do the cooking, but most of the time my wife, cooks only when she's angry or she's ill. I have to cook. Okay, so when I cook, I check double it, triple, everything is okay, not. But when she prepared, she is not checking it because she knows the audience. She knows the people who are going to consume, myself, my daughter, and my son, and she's doing this day in, day out. So now I'm introducing a third concept, that the process through which your products or your object on which you want to collect the data is being brought in front of you. If there's a lot of variation on the back end, then you need a bigger sample size. Okay, see here, this is a juice bottle, let's say some grapes juice. Thousands of bottles being produced, but the process is standardized, the concentration, everything. You might have seen this Coca-Cola cans or thumbs up cans. If you want to do research on that, if somebody wants to check how much pesticide, how much sugar content each of those can have, they don't have to take a large sample. Though the population, the lot is very big, you don't have to take a large sample because the process is standardized. However, the audience is large. If anything goes wrong, all of those people are going to put a case onto the Coca-Cola. So the risk is very high, but at the same time, the process through which this particular objects are being made, products are being made, they are very standardized in nature. So we have now three things: sample size, the risk what we take based on the decisions, and the process through which my objects are being processed. So keeping this in mind, let's see the advantage. The advantage is obviously we want to save money and time. Like in India, we do the population counting, the census, only after every 10 years. So it was done in 2001, it was done in 2011, it was due in 2021, but may be postponed because of the corona, because of the COVID-19 situation, but every 10 years. Why they are not doing every year? It's a costly, right? It's a marathon exercise to go and ask each and every person, who are you and all those things. So that's a whole population study, that 136 crore people you have to go and ask. We are not going to do day in, day out because it consumes a lot of money and time. Also, if you do the sampling, you can broaden the scope of the study. You can collect multiple samples from different aspects, and different group of people, you can include them. And if the research process is destructive, the way Mr. Manav has burned all the matchsticks, if the process is that kind of nature, you do not have any other option other than going for the sampling. And if accessing the population is impossible, like the whole population access is impossible, the sample is the only option. For example, if I ask you, how many of India's population would be willing to sit for my lecture? Are you going to go and check each and every person? Never, no? Never. It's, in fact, for you in this much of time, it's impossible to reach out to the whole people, the whole population of the India. So you'll never able to do that. So in these situations, we have to resort to the sampling. Let's see the sampling concepts in further more detail, somewhat technically, right? So what we say, with proper sampling method, a sample result can provide a good estimate of the population characteristics. Now there are two words here need to be noted down. First is the proper, and second, the sample will never give the reality. The sample will never give the reality. It will always give the estimate. So if you take a sample, let's say you have designed one advertisement, let's say, and you wanted to show this advertisement to a audience, let's say. So the reality is what? Actually, the ad is being displayed, and then everybody sees those ads and then they give their opinion. And 2 days back, my son, who is right now in 7th standard, he was seeing one ad about the phone pay. It's a payment gateway, phone pay. So the ad was saying, her phone pay. That means on every phone, we have a phone pay. So my son says, Papa, what kind of advertisement they are making? If already on all the phones, the phone pay is there, then why to advertise? So this is the one view of the audience. There may be 19 more people who have seen this ad. Now all these 20 people together will give you one picture, but that picture will not be a reality. That will be only an estimate that out of the 19 people, out of the 20 people, let's say 16 people like your ad. Then you say, okay, 80% people are preferring your ad. But this is not the reality. This is the only estimate. Remember, when you actually telecast, when you actually relay that ad, and let's say all the targeted audience see that ad, and let's say hypothetically, all of them gives you a feedback, and then you say, okay, out of the 24 crores people who saw my ads, out of that, let's say around 22 crore people liked it. Then it's a reality. So the sample will always give you estimate. Sample will always give you estimate. Now, what is the difference between the reality and estimate? The estimate can go wrong, right? Estimate can go wrong. So that is the risk what I was telling you. Remember, I told you the risk is if the risk is bigger, now you have to understand from where the risk is originating. The risk is originating because based on the sample, I'm trying to estimate the reality. Whether really 80% people are going to like it, or I estimate that around 80% people are going to like my ad. Okay, so clear about this. That's what we talked about. Now the basic terms, the object on which you want to collect the data. Let's say the people liking or disliking about your advertisement. So the people are your entity from where you are going to collect the data. Next is the population. So are you going to ask everybody in India, all 36 crore people about your ad? No, sir. There may be few people who are just born. उनको तो पता भी नहीं लगेगा. They may not be knowing what advertisement is all about. So you define your population. Whom are the, let's say, targeted audience of this advertisement? You say, okay, those people who know English, those who are seeing the TV. So you'll start putting conditions, right? You'll start describing your population. So in a way, what you're doing actually, you are preparing a frame that my targeted audience is the people who are of age group 18 to 45, who are English literate people, let's say, who are active on the mobile phone, because let's say my ad is going to go on mobile phone, on social media, let's say through social media. So now we are putting this conditions. With this condition, you have one frame. Let's say out of 36 crore people, the people who qualify this criteria, age group 18 to 45, English literate, and those who use mobile phone actively. those who are active mobile users, not like me, who looks at the mobile phone maybe 2-3 hours, once in a 2-3 hours, and in the night just 9:30 chhod do. But active, mobile users. So if you put this condition, you'll have one frame. I hope you are able to visualize this. And from that frame, you pick up a sample. Why we do this? Why we do this? Because we want to control the study. We want to control the study. Now, suppose in this frame, since you have put a condition that only the age group 18 to 25, 18 to 45, so the people who are above 45 and the people who are below 18, whatever estimate I'm going to make, those estimates, those decisions are not applicable to the people who are above 45 and the people who are below 18. So in your research, this kind of question will come. The person who is trying to question you or trying to assess you, he or she is going to ask question something like this. Okay, what was your sampling? Then you say, I collected data from X, Y, Z. I collected data from the people who are 18 to 45 age group. Then he's going to pose a question. Is your findings are applicable to a person who is retired? Now you think, maybe your findings looks generic in nature. Let's say your findings are that these ads are good for not good. This advertisement is liked by most of the female audience. Now the person is going to say, okay, if there is one retired lady, if she sees your ad, whether she's going to like or not, and if your sample says 80% liking, you should not carry forward your 80% liking from the sample which was made based on the frame of the age group 18 to 45. Because in your sample, this age group was not included. In your sample, this age group was not included. So you are not allowed to carry forward the estimate what you made from the age group 18 to 45 on to the age group which is beyond 45. Hence, in India, the people who are in the age group 18 to 45 are my sampled population. So whatever conclusion I'm going to make, that conclusion is only applicable to that population. Period. However convincing that conclusion will be, I cannot take that conclusion on to the population which was not sampled. Right? So now we are introducing a word here like sampled population. So we have a population, 136 crore people, out of which we put a lot of condition. And from that, we identified one frame. From this frame, we picked up a sample. And based on this sample, we made some conclusion. Now those conclusions are only applicable to my sampled population, not to anybody else. I hope those technical terms are a little bit clear to you. If not, you can raise your hand or you can park your questions. I will be happy to answer them somewhere at the end of my talk. I have been given 1 hour, yeah, it's of 24 minutes now. So now let's see, if we understood the population, let's see what kind of population we have. So we have something called as a finite population and something called as an infinite population. What we mean by finite population? The matchbox was a finite population. Why? Because the whole of the matchsticks, all the 30 matchsticks are there in front of me. Okay. And out of that, I'm going to select. Clear? Take a second case. A newborn baby. We are trying to estimate what is the weight of the newborn baby in India. How we are going to estimate? On the first day of the baby, when the baby is born, let's say on the first day, because after 1 day, after 24 hours, the water in the body get evaporated and baby shrinks a little bit and the weight reduces a little bit. That happened into both of my child. So I'm saying on the first day of the birth of the baby, we want to check the as born weight of the babies. Now this, I can't tell all the whole of the 136 crore people, all your babies, everything, you bring in front of me, I'm going to take a random sample out of it. It's simply impossible. Right? It's practically impossible to do that. So what we do, we select a couple of hospitals, let's say, and we say, okay, tell me how many babies are born today. And say, totally, let's say hypothetically, 1,000 babies are born in whole of the Gujarat or India, let's say. And out of the 1,000, we collect the data for, let's say, around 10. Tomorrow again we go to the hospital and ask the records. Again, next day again. What's happening here? My targeted population. What is my targeted population? The newborn baby. They are not there in front of me. They are being born. Every day they're being born, and I'm collecting the data. I'm collecting the data. So whatever conclusion I'm going to make, let's say after 30 days, you collected 100 samples every day. So after 30 days, you have a 3,000 data with you. Now this 3,000 data, based on this data, you are going to generalize something for the population which is still not born. You are going to say on an average in India, the newborn baby weight is, let's say, 1,500 gram or 1,500 gram or 2,000 gram or 2 kilos. But somebody says, can we apply this to the babies who are not born? Yes, we are going to apply it, because otherwise we have to keep on doing this study on a continuous basis. So that's we call as the infinite population, right? The whole population, or the whole target, the objects are not there in front of you. They are being produced like these bottles. These bottles are being produced and is coming in front of you. And based on this, we take a sample. Let's say in the morning, 8 o'clock, I take a one sample. Evening, 4 o'clock, I take a one sample. Finish. Does that mean that after 4 o'clock, they are not going to produce a bottle? They are going to produce a bottle. But I didn't take a sample from that lot which was produced. Right? So at home, if you have seen a food products, they carry something called as a batch number. So what that signifies? It says one sample out of this batch was took out, was tested, found okay. Hence, this batch was allowed to go into the market. Now, it doesn't mean that after the sample was took out, the batch production was stopped. They may have a one batch. That one batch may run for, let's say, 2 days, 3 days, maybe one for full 1 week. And after that 1 week, they'll take out one sample or two sample or whatever. And that sample estimates are going to be applicable for the whole of the batch. Okay, I hope you are able to now differentiate between this finite and infinite. Why I'm bringing these concepts? Because when you are about to decide your sample size, or about the sampling method, you should consider all these aspects, and then only you should decide whether I should go for a large sample size or small sample size. Okay. So let's see what are the options we have for sampling. So in general, for research studies, we have two sampling: random probability samples and non-random. In fact, today itself, I can call Dr. Vaibhavi now. She was defending her thesis, in front of one expert, and expert was repeatedly asking, was it a probability sampling or non-probability sampling? So this question keeps on coming. So we have a two. What is meant by probability and non-probability? Let's say in simple terms, random and non-random. When we say random, let's say I open a matchbox and I take out the first two matchsticks from the surface. Then somebody might say, sir, this is not a random because you picked up the top matchsticks. This happens. Now the mango season is coming, right? So many fruit sellers will come to your doorstep and say, these are the very good mangoes, please buy from me. And let's say one fellow brings a 4 dozen box of mango. How they keep this 4 dozen mangoes? They keep, let's say, around 12, 14 mangoes on the layer 1, then some dry grass, second and third. If your mother and father is concerned about the quality of the mango, are they going to pick up the sample from the top? I don't do that. I pick up one from the top, one from the somewhere middle, and one from the bottom. Randomly, all mixed together. That's called random. If it is not random, then it's a non-random. How we are going to qualify whether something is random or not? If you cannot infer the pattern, of taking out sample, it's called random. For example, if I am about to take a sample mangoes from that box, you can't predict I'm going to pick up from the top layer or middle layer or bottom layer. But if you always take out from the top layer, the fruit seller knows, okay, Dr. Dinesh always take out the sample from the top. So what he or she is going to do? They'll keep the good mangoes on the top, right? So that's what one of the disadvantage or the problem of non-random sampling. And that's where the research work will be undervalued if you follow the non-random sampling. That doesn't mean that you can't do it. You can't do it. Okay. I myself wrote one paper which has around 4 to 5 citation likes in last 4 to 5 months. And in that, I very clearly wrote it was a convenient sampling and it was ABDC category journal and they accepted it. Only the chief editors just wrote me one mail, Dinesh, can you justify your convenient sampling? I justified and it was accepted. So both are acceptable, but as far as possible, go for the random sampling. Which are the options? Simple random sampling, like you have a matchstick in front of you, just take out all matchstick, put it in a ball and mix it very well and close your eyes, pick up 2 or 3 or call some child. Beta tu aja, utha le, do things, matchsticks. And those matchsticks I'm going to burn. Why we do this? If at all there were some bad matchstick which I don't know, those will also have a chance to get selected. That's a basic premises on which the simple random sampling works. That if there are, because my purpose of testing the matchstick is what? I want to find out whether this matchbox contains a good matchsticks or bad matchsticks. So I'm taking a negative approach. If they are all good, I don't know how to test, right? I don't know how to test. Since I have an apprehension that there may be some matchsticks which are not good, hence I'm checking it. So I should mix up very well. So if at all there were some bad matchsticks, they will be mixed up and they'll have an equal chance of getting selected. That's the intention. Next, sometimes it happens that after mixing also, you are not able to ensure that each type of objects have an equal chance. Then what you do? You go for a stratified random sampling. For example, let's say in my class, I have a 30 boys, 30 girls, let's say hypothetically. And I want to take out a sample of 10 students. If I mix up them, all them, and I close my eyes, okay, now say this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 people. There may be chance that all 10 are boys. And when you present this kind of data in your research, somebody is going to say, okay, your sample was having only boys. That means your estimates are only applicable to the boys, not to the girls. Now you do not want to land up with this problem. So what you will do? Okay, let me go for the stratified random sampling. That means I'm going to make a strata. Strata means category, groups. I have 2 groups, boys and girls. Randomly, I'll take it 5 from the boys, 5 from the girls. And then I'll mix up this 10 and collect the data for this 10 students. Now you have equal weightage. Not necessarily equal. It can be a different proportion also. Different proportion also, right? That's a stratified random sampling. Systematic sampling. It's mainly used for the infinite population at a regular interval. For example, let's say you are collecting a data on the toll booth. That on the toll booth we have an advertisement, and you want to collect the data. How that advertisement? You might have seen the toll booth, right? It's a small gate which has a small width but very big height. Somebody wants to advertise on that height, and you want to check whether people are able to spot that advertisement or not. So what are you going to do? You can't do the simple random sampling. Why? You can't tell everybody to come to one room, all the people who are traveling from there, right? Everybody come to my home. And out of those 1,000 people who has crossed the toll booth, I'm going to select randomly 100. It's simply not possible. Nobody's going to listen to you. So what you'll do? You'll go to the toll booth at regular interval, let's say every 2 hours or every 3 hours or something, and you're going to ask them. That's called systematic sampling. You go at regular interval. Cluster sampling. Now this is also somewhat like stratified random sampling, but exactly opposite. In stratified random sampling, what happens? In a group, in a boys group, all are boys. In a girl groups, all are girls. And from the boys, 30 boys, randomly I pick up 5. From the 30 girls, randomly I pick up 5 girls. And then I take a data on that. In cluster sampling, what I do, I go for the classes. I'll say one class, they have almost, let's say 50-50 boys and girls. I go to second class, again 50-50 boys and girls. Third class, 50-50 boys. Similarly, I will have, let's say 10 classes. So I'm going to call each of those classes a cluster. And each cluster contains all type of people, all type of students, boys and girls, almost equal proportion. Now I do not have to go to all the 10 classes separately and pick up a 10 students. Out of the 10 classes, I can select any 1 or 2 classes and check everybody in that class. How it is going to help you? Let's say you are doing study on the city wise. And let's say in India, we have around 30 big cities. If you go to each city and collect the data, it's going to be very difficult. But if you can prove that each city is a cluster and all these clusters are more or less same. When I say same means in each cluster we have an equal proportion of all the objects, all the types. If that's the case, if you can prove that all these clusters are more or less same, out of the 30 cities, you can select any one or two cities and you can do the study. So it's going to save your time and cost. Otherwise, you have to, take a car and just move around, touring India for 1 month. So that's what about random sampling. There may be many more techniques, but I thought I'll just, touch upon this 3, 4. In case of non-random samplings, we have something like convenience sampling. What I do, I stand in front of my cabin and who's passing through my cabin, I'm going to stop them. Hey, please, are you happy with the Navrachna University education program? He or she will say, yes, okay, not okay, whatever. Second person, third person, fourth person. I'm just taking. So it's a convenience. I don't want to travel. I don't want to spend too much of money. But now the sample data, what I collected, I don't know from what background they are. I don't know whether they are actually student or past student, right? Second is judgment sampling. Sometimes I feel that these people are good to give the data. Many times, let's say we are doing phone call and we see the name of the people, and if somebody is very aged person, let's say 55 age, I should not call this person. I should not call this person because this person will not give a right answer. You are putting your judgment, you are putting your biases. See, in the earlier case, you put your convenience first. In the second, you are putting your biases. The third one, friends, please mute your microphones. Third is a quota sampling. What do we say? I want to collect the data which should have 5 boys and 5 girls. So I'm going to ask first person. Let's say I'm standing in front of my cabin and the first person is a boy. Let's say I ask the data. Second, boy, I ask the data. Third, girl. Fourth, fifth, sixth, all boys. Now I say, okay, boys ka quota khatam. Now I'm going to ask only the girls. Now it might be possible that from that moment onwards, some boys have came in front of your cabin. They could have been a good sample point for you, but you didn't ask them because your quota was over. That's why the quota sampling is also non-random sampling, which you need to have a good reason to use it. And the last one is a snowball sampling. What I say, I asked one person, let's say Dr. Robbie, and I collect data from him. Then I'm going to tell Dr. Robbie, do you know anybody who can help me to collect the data? Dr. Robbie said, okay, you ask Chaitali, you ask Pranshu, you ask XYZ person. And I'm going to ask them. And I'm going to ask same question to them. Collect the data from them, ask same question to them. Can you suggest 2, 3 names? Now here what's happening, it's not my bias. It's their bias is playing its role. So overall the bias is still there, either mine or somebody else. So you can see here in all the 4 cases, the main issue was the bias. Main issue was the bias. And because of this bias, your estimate will also be biased. Your estimate will also be a bias. And hence, your conclusion will not be of a good use. And that's why the non-random sampling is not preferred. But many people use it. I told you, in my research itself, I use the convenience sampling. Now, let's take an example, small thing. If you have a finite sample, let's say matchbox simple case. You mix up, you take a sample, you check it. Let's say you have food grains in front of you, rice in a ball. And you want to check, let's say around 50 rice out of it, whether they have good quality or not. Like basmati rice, what we have, right? When we go to the shop to buy, we take a small, small quantity of basmati in our hand and we try to smell how good smell it is. But we take a small sample. Since the population was lying that Gunny sack was containing that basmati rice, I could have taken a sample from that. Take a case here. I conducted a quiz, let's say. There were 60 students. The quiz marks are known to all of you, all 60 students, individually. And I asked one of you, can you find out what's the average of the class for this quiz? And the condition is that you can't ask everybody. You have to ask only 10 people, 10 students. How are you going to do this? How are you going to do this? Would you put all the students into one room and ask them to mix up? Or would you put, how you are going to identify those 10 so that we are sure that we have followed a random sampling? How to do this? If it was a soup, tomato soup, you could have mixed with a spoon, right? If it was rice, you could have mixed with your hand. How to mix these marks? Consider that you don't have access to the marks. You don't have access. You don't know marks, right? You can only ask 10 people. Which 10 student you are going to ask? One idea which one of my students told me is that you print this paper, cut this roll number into small chit, fold them, put inside the bowl. So that bowl will contain 60 cheats, mix them and select 10 cheats randomly from that, open them and say roll number 9, roll number 14, roll number 21, roll number 41, roll number 3, and you ask them their marks. Yes, that's a good way. And that's what the random sampling is. Suppose instead of 60, there was 6,000. Are you going to print and cut? No, right? 60,000? Never, sir. Pagal hua hai kya? I can't do this. So how to do that? What I follow? We generate a random number. There's a function in Excel called random number generation. So it just creates a random number between 0 to 1 at a 4-digit or 5-digit, whatever. So I put this data in the Excel table, Microsoft Excel table. I generate a random number. Then I arrange all these students in an ascending order of the random number. In the ascending order of the random number. And whichever 10 students come on the top in my random number, I ask them the marks. No need to print and cut and everything. Why I'm showing this? Because you might decide to follow a particular type of sampling, but when you actually execute, and if you do not execute to the spirit of that sampling, you'll be caught at the later stage. Somebody will surely prove that it was not a random sampling. And in some of the defense, I found this, the person made a claim in one of the slides, and said, I follow the stratified random sampling. But when actually it was executed, it turned out to be a quota sampling. So it should not happen that we decide to follow a stratified random sampling or cluster sampling, and we, actually go for something else. For the infinite sampling, just ensure, this is example. Okay. For the infinite sampling, just ensure that, whenever you pick out one bottle from here, let's say, and let's say that bottle comes out to be a damaged bottle. So the next time you should not bind yourself that this time I'm not going to select a damaged bottle. If you decide that, that means you have created bias. Because in an infinite population, what happens? The population is not there in front of you. This happens on a days. For example, let's say you decided that every day, 8 o'clock in the morning, I'm going to go and take a sample. Okay, 5 people. You go once, you find one thing. You go second time. If you find that every day morning, 8 o'clock, some pattern is developing, then you might decide on the third day, I'll not go at 8 o'clock, I'll go at 10 o'clock. Because 8 o'clock ko acha sample nahi milta hai. Again, bias comes in. So what point I want to make is that your earlier 2 days observation should not have a shadow onto your third observation or on your seen on the third days of sampling. So each interval sampled should be independent of the earlier observation. Let me explain this with one more example. You toss a coin. What's the chance of coming head and tail? 50-50 we say. You toss 9 times, let's say. And all the 9 times, coincidentally, it was all heads. Now, can you say the 10th time, the tail will be more preferred? No, right? Still, we have a 50% chance only. Whatever was the outcome for the earlier 9 times has no effect onto the 10th experiment. Similarly, in your infinite population sampling, whatever data you have collected up to that point should not have any impact onto the way you are going to do the sampling on the next day. So your each day's sample should be independent of the findings from the earlier data. Now, let me show you the sampling in practice, how it's been done. This was one of the paper where what the researcher has done. They collected 90 theses, PhD theses, and just checked how many people have followed what kind of sampling. So surprisingly, 54 out of 90, so you can say 54, 60% of the researchers have not mentioned at all what kind of sampling they have followed. Okay, I'm not asking you to go for such kind of do not go for such kind of decision. Okay, but most of the cases have followed random, and you can see here beautifully here, convenient, own class, purposeful. That's the next biggest, right? Out of the 60, forget about this 60%, the highest is random sampling, 14. But the next is convenient. That's what point I wanted to make. And still all of them got cleared. All of them got cleared. So it's not random or non-random, which is good, which is bad. It's how justifiable your decision is. That's what matters a lot. Okay. And you can see some of the known words here: stratified, clustered, proportional, systematic, all the things what we saw just now. Next one, what was the sample size that you use? Now we are going to the number part. Till now we were discussing about the type. Now we are going to number part. So these are the different sizes. Let's say somebody has gone to the as high as 1,000 above, and somebody has as small as less than 10. Now you may say, you may have a doubt, sir, if that's the case, does the sample size matter? Yes, it matters. But what kind of research you are going to conduct, accordingly you are going to take a call. If it's a qualitative research, if it's a case study research, maybe 8 or 10 is sufficient. In one of my research, it's only how many? Only 5 companies I studied and wrote a paper, and it went through in one of the international conference. But in my PhD thesis, I took a sample of 130. So for the sample size, friends, if you search the internet or something, you'll see such kind of scary formulas. If I start explaining these formulas, next time you are going to tell Dr. Robbie, sir, Dinesh sir ko mat bulao. Don't call him. He puts a lot of symbols, mathematical, dimag chakra jata hai karke. So I'm not going to explain this formula. Don't worry. But this is a sample size for a two-tail hypothesis test. One more, a sample size for interval estimations. Again, some crazy symbols. We are not going to detail of that. Or some of you, if you search on Google, you'll see, most probably you'll see this site where you put confidence level, where you put margin of error, where you put population size, and you say calculate. I put some numbers and it gave me a 370. In one of my friend, I'll not name that person, he told me, Dinesh, many sample size nikala. Is it okay? Can you justify? So he actually, went backward. He wrote his thesis. He did whole of his study, everything, and his sample size was 350 or something. And he told me, sir, Dinesh, can you get me a justification to justify my sample size 370? I gave him this site. He tried with these numbers here, some different numbers, and he came out with this 370. He put a snapshot of this one and went ahead for his defense. And he was drilled heavily for this because he could not justify why he took 95% here. He could not justify what is the meaning of this 5%. He could not justify on what basis he estimated that the population size was 10,000. So even if you are using some website, most probably you are going to say, sir, I got it from the website. No. You have to justify all these parameters. Then only the website follows one formula, but formula needs some variables, and these are those variables. So what I'd advise, where we have some backup. If you have a study where you have 2 independent variables and 1 dependent variable, so there are 3 variables. So normally people say, if there are 3 variables, 3 into 50, 150 should be a sample size. 150 should be a sample size. For each variable, you are asked, let's say 1, 2, 3 questions. So total, how many questions you are asked? 9 questions, right? Here, 9 questions you are asked. So if you go by question, then per question around 15 sample size. So 9 into 15, around 135. So whichever is the maximum out of these 2. Go ahead. Most of the times your audience will accept this logic. Let me mute a person who is okay. Sure. So what I would say, search for good papers and take that as a basis to justify your sample size. If you are doing study for media research, say take 2-3 media research paper, see what sample size they have used and follow that. Last, I'll just close my discussion. I just close my discussion with the comment what I got for my research. The reviewer commented, you claim to have administered a survey questionnaire with 20 items on a sample of 67 firms. See here, so talking 20 items. Normally a minimum of 100 forms, n into 5, he is following n into 5, or max item in a construct or multiplied by 10 are required for any meaningful econometric or structural analysis. Why didn't you do that? When I asked him, sir, on what basis 5 and 10 you decided? He says, On an average, people what follow this. So there are some thumb rules. There are some thumb rules. How I justified? I gave this answer. I gave this one paper reference that this particular person suggested 15 observations per indicator, per predictor is sufficient for small shrinkage. Now I have to justify this for small shrinkage. You can see this parameter 0.05 and 0.9. And in that case, it came out to 60 plus, and mine was 65. Also, I gave 2 more papers. So this paper, I gave 2 more papers as the reference. So all these 3 papers were actually more or less did a similar research what I did. And hence my sample size was justified and they accepted it. And finally, that's how I became a PhD holders. It was just 1 month back. So that was about quantitative. In qualitatives, we have something called as a purposive sampling or theoretical sampling. Depending on the concept, you try to decide what sample size you should follow. And there's a very beautiful concept called theoretical saturation. Let's say you are taking interview data. You ask 2 people, 3 people, 4 people, 5 people. And after 5 people in 5 interviews, if you are not able to find anything additional, anything new information, all are started talking same thing again and again. That means whatever concept you are trying or whatever knowledge you are trying to capture, that has been saturated. Now you can stop. So there is no predetermined size in case of a qualitative research. Once you reach a theoretical saturation limit, you stop there. But you have to justify this. You have to document this very well and put forward. So with that, I would like to stop my discussions. I was to finish at 45 minutes, but I took 7 minutes more. Sorry for that. Open to your questions, friends. Dr. Robbie, is the time-wise is okay?
No problem, sir. You can take 5 more minutes or 10 minutes. No issues. Very good.
For Q&A, right?
Yes, Dr. Dinesh.
Yeah.
Yes.
Friends, please shoot your questions. I will try to address if I know the answer. If not, I'll get back to you, or I'll just admit that I don't know. Please. Oh, if you keep silence, I'll be happy, that I can claim I saved 8 minutes of my presentation. But at the same time, I'll be worried, that whole of my discussion went bouncer. Is it so? Is it so? Yeah, friends, any doubts? Any comments, any suggestions?
Sir is very good in statistical method and all, but I told him, sir, should not go to that level because you're just starting only. So sir is very good in Excel also. So all these techniques, I think sir, we should have separate session for that, right?
Oh, sure. I'll research is my passion, so I love to speak on that and work with that. So friends, I just give a small promise to you. You can take my email ID from the Dr. Robbie, and in future, wherever in your research, and if you feel Dinesh can be of any help, just drop me a mail. Since it's my passion, I love to work on research, so I'll be happy to help you out. Yeah.
So we had a session of yours during the general coursework, and it was very nice. And we hope we could hear more from you.
Kripaja,
I've been there for the general coursework.
Mass communication research scholar. She's a professor.
Okay.
In Moscow.
Okay.
Dinesh sir, can I just make an observation?
Please, ma'am. Please.
Yes, sir. Sir, you've given a very good explanation of what could be random sampling. You also talked about the lottery method, cluster. But what I felt was if you can just tell the students, we focus largely on survey method. If you can just tell the students how important non-probability sampling is when you're doing an experimental kind of a study. Okay. Where random sampling becomes very difficult and one has to go in for a smaller group, and that time non-probability sampling becomes the only option left for the researcher if you want to try out an intervention and see its effectiveness.
Right.
I'll give 1 or 2 examples, so that they also get an idea that non-probability sampling also has its own importance.
Right. Sure. So let me just prepare a slide for the slide. Let's say, friends, you are doing some experimentation, okay? And it's something like this. You have 3 types of content into your advertisement. Okay, let's say the text, the images, and the background. Okay, text, images, and background. and you have a choice. You have a choice that whether my image content will be heavy or low, or my text content should be heavy or low, or my, let's say, background content should be heavy or low. Now, what happened in this case? If you are trying to understand this and you want to do the study on this, then what you will do? You will create a combination. You'll actually create an experiment, right? So in your experiment, you have a, let's say, 3: image, text, and background. And I'm going to say high or low here. So since there are 3 variables, 2 levels, so there are 8 combinations. So now I have 8 combinations. Now all these 8 combinations, I want to show it to some audience, and I want to take their feedback. Okay. Now you have a choice whether I should go for random sampling or should I go for a purposive sampling here. Here you want your audience to be a skillful or knowledgeable enough to understand this image, text, background, those concepts of your advertising. So the audience should not be a, let's say, a random sample, anybody from the population. You pick up and show their ad. That may be the next stage. But here the purpose is to check how much, whether I should keep the high content of image or high level of text or high level of background. To decide upon these combinations, you should go for a population, or you should go for a sample or the respondents who are knowledgeable. So here we go by purposive sampling. That purpose is this, and for that I should not be going for the random sampling. I should go going by the selected people who are knowledgeable enough. In one of my PhD part, small part, I've been told, to justify 2-3 points. So when I asked my guide, she told me that, Dinesh, why can't you do one thing? You select 4 people who knows about this subject and who are positive towards it. Select 4 more who knows about this subject and who are negative about this. Now here judgment comes into picture, right? Because I'm taking a judgment that these people are knowledgeable, these people are not knowledgeable, and these people are pro and these people are not pro. And out of those groups, I'm selecting 4 people. So I'm going by my judgment here. But the purpose was to differentiate among the available option. And hence I have to go for a judgment or a purposive sampling. Are you getting me? So this way, if you go by, just a minute. If your objective is to experiment and evaluate, and for that you need a particular kind of a respondent, then please go and use a non-probabilistic sampling. That's a non-random sampling, maybe a judgment or purposive. Mandira ma'am, does that answer what you wanted to highlight? Mandira ma'am? Okay, I think microphone is not working. Anyway, so yeah, so that's all, friends. So I'm done. If anybody has a question later on also, I can be happy to answer there on email or on phone. Thank you very much, Dr. Robbie, for giving me to share with this.
We will share your email ID also to the students, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr.
Dinesh.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dinesh Panchal, for sharing your views and expertise on sampling and sampling design with us. It was a pleasure listening to you. And thank you, Dr. Mandira, all the participants and the faculty members for attending the session.